A jazz trumpeter named Marcus Thorne discovered a package stashed under the awning of his usual hangout, the Blue Mirage, on a chilly night in January in Chicago. Inside, a baby with eyes that resembled polished obsidian cried quietly while being covered in a blanket that had faded somewhat and was sewn with adinkra symbols from West Africa. Next to her was a paper that was crumpled and said, "Her name is Zora. Maintain her safety. I am unable to." A man named Marcus, who had suffered the loss of his own family in a tenement fire many years before, felt the tug of destiny. As a black guy who was parenting a white kid by himself, he adopted Zora. Defying the stereotypes that were prevalent at that time period, he became a father with every fiber of his being. He went from playing in smoky bars to playing at library story times. And the scream of his trumpet was replaced by lullabies that blended Yoruba traditional sounds and Coltrane rhythms. Zora spent her childhood surrounded by Marcus's jazz friends, and her environment was a tapestry of bebop, Marcus's stories of Harlem's Renaissance, and the weight of unknown beginnings. Zora Thorne was a talented ethnomusicologist who, at the age of 32, was traveling from New Orleans to Senegal in search of diasporic rhythms. Just a few weeks before she was scheduled to present a revolutionary research on lost musical lineages, she disappeared. Her research laptop was gone, and her keys were placed neatly on Marcus's doorstep. There was no fight, and there was no message. All that was left was an empty flat. Nobody was located by the police. Her fiancé was perplexed, and her co-workers murmured about her sudden breakthrough. Marcus, who had silver hair but was still smart, refused to give in to hopelessness. "What if the silence we ignore holds the loudest truth?" he said, referring to their most recent talk he had with him. He was aware that this was not a coincidence. Something had been discovered by Zora, something that was connected to her quiet and her roots. Marcus browsed over Zora's notes. A pattern was concealed within her annotations, and it consisted of allusions to a rare lullaby variety that was found in coastal Georgia and was associated with Gullah Geechee towns. Dr. Eris Holden, a prickly Gula historian, was the person he was able to locate. Zora's fixation with a local tale was disclosed by Eris, although with some reluctance. The local legend in question was a white heiress named Blythe Calhoun, who had deserted her family in 1977 due to a scandal and returned. Some months later, ill and brokenhearted, Blythe had passed away at a young age, and one of her last words was a child's cry near the Savannah docks. A secret notebook belonging to Blythe was discovered by Marcus and Eris. Her confession was written in a shaky script. She was pregnant by a black jazz pianist, and her family had forbidden her to marry him. She had abandoned their kid in Chicago, thinking that her lover's community would provide a safe haven for them. But Elias Vance, the pianist, had died away in a car accident a few weeks earlier, and he had no idea that Blythe was expecting a child. The last entry in Blythe's diary read, "I stole her future." Zora, which means dawn in the language that her father cherished, should be her name. Where I fell, may she soar to the top. Not only had Zora vanished, but she had also gone into hiding in order to safeguard Marcus. According to her DNA study, Blythe's diary was accurate. Blythe's strong family had covered up Ilias's death, which was a hit-and-run accident caused by Blythe's inebriated brother. However, she had also discovered a terrible reality about the situation. By using threats, they were able to quiet Blythe. As Zora's investigation got closer and closer to the truth, she was sent a warning that read, "Stop, or your father pays." While she was gathering evidence, she pretended to vanish in order to divert Marcus's attention away from the situation. Zora was discovered by Marcus at a Gullah safe house, which was guarded by Eris's relatives. They went up against the Calhouns when they had obtained the proof. The brother, who was now a pathetic magnate, admitted his guilt. The win, however, was a hollow one. As Zora sobbed for her parents whom she would never know, Marcus comforted her. He cried for Blythe's sacrifice in Elias's lost intellect. When Marcus arrived to Blythe's overgrown grave, he played his trumpet and performed a bluesy interpretation of the lullaby that Blythe had murmured in her notebook. This performance was therapeutic. The Adinkra quilt was on the grave when Zora put it there. At long last, the symbols, Sankofa and Akoma, made perfect sense. One of Zora's works was published under the title, The Silent Note, Reclaiming a Stolen Legacy. Marcus ultimately made his first album, which was titled Zora's Dawn. And it was a fusion of jazz, gullah rhythms, and the lullaby that linked to fractured histories. Marcus was 80 years old at the time. It is a tribute to the fact that love, like music, can reverberate beyond generations, transforming repressed anguish into a collective song of resiliency. Their connection, which was put to the test by silence, emerged stronger. There was a seismic event that occurred in the realms of jazz and cultural reclamation when the album Zora's Dawn was released. It was more than simply an album. In spite of the fact that it was acclaimed by critics as a love letter to lost lineages, Marcus saw the studio sessions as a baptism. When he played a note, it was as if he were releasing a breath that he had been holding for decades. When he had some time to himself in between takes, he would draw the fading Adinkra symbols on Zora's quilt, which was now framed and displayed in his living room. We'd also listen to Blythe's spectral lullaby as it woven its way through his own tunes. Aura, on the other hand, turned her sorrow into a positive initiative. Together with Dr. Eris Holden, she participated in the establishment of the Silent Note Project, a charitable organization that aims to digitize recordings, sheet music, and oral histories from underrepresented musical groups. The Gullah Geechee shout songs and the secret jazz. Archives of black train porters were their first areas of concentration. These were the same individuals who may have been responsible for spreading rumors about Elias Vance's expertise between Chicago and Savannah. On the other hand, they discovered that tranquility was a restless creature. One drenched with rains during the day of Tuesday, Zora's workplace received a parcel. There is no reply address. On the inside was a distorted vinyl record dated 1976 that was wrapped in brittle newspaper. The record was unidentified. In the nook underneath it was a single crushed magnolia petal, which, according to Blythe Calhoun's notebook, was her favorite. The hands of Zora were shaking. Should we expect another threat from Calhoun? Is it a nasty joke? After just a few minutes, Marcus came. They did it together, in the quiet atmosphere of his former recording studio where the acoustics were very quiet. Crackles hissed like waves emanating from afar. Then, a trumpet erupted, and it was obviously Elias Vance. It was raw, urgent, and uncomplicated. Blues scales were intertwined with West African highlife riffs, creating a sound that Elias referred to as saltwater jazz. This style was groundbreaking. The last track came to a conclusion with the voice of a guy, one that was worn out yet tender. In the event that Blythe ever comes across this, the song will be ingrained in our child's very being. To honor the wind, I will give him the name Zephyr. That is, she. It's Zora. It's true. This is Zora Vance. Isn't it reminiscent of the start of the day? There was a resounding silence in the room. The hand of Zora was taken by Marcus. He had given her a name. Elias had selected her name while anticipating a future that had been taken away from him. Blythe was not the only one. Rather of being a threat, the record was a communication from beyond the dead. Who was the sender of this message? An old member of the band? A Calhoun servant who was riddled with guilt? When Eris contacted Zora, he was out of breath and said, "Zora. I found a ledger entry from 1977. Blythe funded a secret pressing of Elias's demo, weeks before she left for Chicago. This added another layer of mystery to the situation. During the time that she was leaving you, she must have brought this record with her. There's been someone watching over it for all of these years." By following the trail of the record, they were able to locate Miss Eulalie, a Gullah midwife who was 94 years old and lived in a home that was yellow like sunflowers on Dofuski Island. The picture of the Adinkra quilt that was on Zora's phone caused her eyes, which were murky due to cataracts, to brighten. Mr. Blythe Calhoun. The contents of my kitchen were as pale as rice flour and shook like a leaf. It was said that she had concealed a piece of her soul in my root cellar before, to her departure on the boat headed north. If she wanted to forget that she was ever here, she paid me with pearl earrings. The knotted finger of Miss Eulalie led in a westerly direction. However, spirits do not remain hidden. To no avail, music, the horn of that guy. She whistled a series of notes which made up Elias's riff. It continued to torment her. This island is still haunted by it when the tide pushes in the correct direction. The document was treasured by Miss Eulalie because she felt the holy weight it carried. Zora had received it after she had read about the confession made by Calhoun in a newspaper that had become tattered. To put it another way, time is passing through my hourglass like sand. The living are the recipients of truth. The recordings that Elias made were the foundation for Zora's subsequent effort, which was titled Saltwater Jazz, the lost voice of Elias Vance. She meticulously reconstructed the files, overlaying them with Gullah-field recordings and Marcus's meditative trumpet refrains, creating a musical discussion that spans many generations. The CD culminated with a duet that was never performed in real life, Elias's recording of Magnolia's Lament. From 1976 was combined with Marcus's answer from 2025, which was titled Zora's Reply. The critics shed tears. Zora received letters from unknown individuals who said, "I heard my grandfather in those notes." Marcus, on the other hand, found Elias's spirit to be a complicated companion. Marcus struggled with a muted sense of jealousy as he listened to the man's fierce and unpolished, brilliant presentation. Zora would be able to detect the difference. Would she have pondered what her life would have been like if she had been raised by a father whose genius blazed like an untamed star rather than a father who had muted his flame for bedtime tales and for packed lunches? Zora could detect his agitation. One evening, she carefully positioned Elias's refurbished trumpet she had discovered at an auction held in the attic of a Calhoun home, next to Marcus's own old instrument. "He gave me my name and my roots," she said. "I am grateful to him. However, you were the one who taught me how to speak. I am writing you a letter, Dad." Love is the entire song, the song goes. 5 years later in Savannah, sparkling research center and performance space known as the Thorne and Vance Archive opened its doors. This was a place where academics were able to trace banjo patterns back to Mali, and where young people were free to remix Elias loops. Even though he was 85 years old at the time, Marcus continued to perform monthly residencies. His sound refined into deep narrative clarity. As Zora oversaw the archive, her laughter reverberated throughout the building's corridors. Her hair, like his, was streaked with silver. There were 3 antiques that were hanging on the wall behind her desk. Quilt created by Adinkra, the pressed magnolia of Elias, which is coated in resin. A restaurant napkin was used to scrawl Marcus's first album sketch, which was titled Zora's Dawn. A teenage musician was experimenting with a song in the courtyard, while listening to living oak trees that were covered with Spanish moss. As the melody soared into the humid air, they were a combination